We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio and to our year-end roundup of Talking Liberty. Well, it's been quite the year, both constitutionally and judicially. And as a fond and or not so fond farewell, we're joined by Legal Affairs Editor and Uprising podcast host, Scott Cosenza, to take a look back at the legal world in focus. Merry Christmas to you, Scott.
Cheers, Mark. Merry Christmas to you.
So before we get started, can you give us a brief rundown of the state of play for abortion in the United States? It seems to me that there's been more legal maneuverings on this than at any time in the last decade, or even possibly since Planned Parenthood v. Casey back in 92. Now, what's your legal take on it?
Well, that is true. The main story, I think, is the success of getting those challenges advanced through the courts to a high level. Now, this has been a kind of a big year for abortion law, but really, it's 2022 that's going to be probably the bigger year, because that's going to either yield a defense of Roe and Casey in some form by the Supreme Court majority, or the opposite, and a denigration of it, perhaps even an overturning of it, if we believe the hopes of conservatives and the fears of the pro-choicers.
So continuing with the Supreme Court, let's go over Maine school choice. Now, school choice obviously come into the headlines a great deal, especially with the election of Glenn Youngkin as the new governor of Virginia. And people, parents specifically, arguing against CRT in the classrooms, against the heavy-handedness of school boards. So what's the significance now of the Maine school choice case?
Well, this case is Carson v. Macon, and I don't think we've spoken about it on Liberty Nation Radio. So this is one of those cases that has the potential to be pretty impactful going forward. Most of the major sort of changes in the law that we see surrounding big issues are not done with one major case on their own. They're done through a series of cases that get to the case that kind of is the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you will. And this is about government funding of private education in religious-based institutions. Maine has a kind of peculiar situation where there are a number of very rural residents who don't have access to a government public school. And so what happens is the state did a workaround where they basically pay for private school tuition for those Mainers to attend a non-government school, but they forbid that money being used at a religious school. So then you have a case where if you're a-religious or anti-religious even, perhaps, you can get the state money, but if you're pro-religious, you can't. So it's a discrimination against the religion specifically. I think it's a very fascinating case. And, the court watchers will tell you that the Supreme Court was hostile to that setup at oral argument. We were waiting for a decision on that, which will come in the new year. But I agree that they were hostile to the setup. At least, the majority of the justices, which are, of course, now Republican appointees and skew conservative.
So it's not quite the school choice, whereas anybody in the country can choose how and where their child is educated. It's more a case of religious discrimination than offering a broad swath school choice to the American public.
That's exactly right. In this case, if it were decided in favor of the plaintiffs who wish to apply that funding to religious schools, if their case was won, this would not mean that there would be public funding for religious schooling. That's why I prefaced my comments by talking about cases building blocks towards major precedents, and I think this case has the potential to be such a building block.
Yeah, that's definitely one to watch. Now, I have to ask, this is something that's very important to many of our listeners, I believe, and of course to yourself and to me. How has this year been for advocates of the Second Amendment?
Well, it's a mixed bag, Mark. In terms of the federal courts, I think it was been a down year. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, sitting in California, derisively called the Ninth Circus, ruled in a case called Duncan v. Bonta. And now this case, since 2006, it has been sort of back and forth batting around the federal courts in California. This all comes from Jerry Brown's 2016 Gunmageddon group of laws that were basically this suite of anti-firearms laws, including a magazine restriction, which is what the Duncan v. Bonta case concerns. Basically, the state, without grandfathering in currently legally owned products, said if you have a firearm magazine that's capable of holding more than 10 rounds, you're going to be a felon if you don't get that magazine out of state or destroy it or throw it away.
So I've got two follow-up questions on that very quickly. Firstly, how long do magazines actually last if they're well cared for?
Well, a metal magazine that's entirely made out of metal will last until the spring gives out. It's dependent on a standard firearm magazine operates by pressuring a plate to feed the ammunition through the top of the magazine, what we call the lips of the magazine. As long as that spring produces sufficient pressure in order to advance the next round up, okay, through the magazine, then it lasts forever. But basically, I mean, a very, very long time. There are plenty of magazines that are in use 50, 70 years after they've been produced without having the springs replaced, and they're fine. The other type of major manufacturer of magazines are plastic, at least plastic in part, and they will hold up until the plastic, I assume, will get brittle enough, or it will degrade over time more quickly than the metal one. But for all intents and purposes, if you had a newborn today and went out and bought a bunch of magazines, they could use them for their entire life and pass them on as well.
So that kind of brings me to my second point here. Now, with these things basically lasting a lifetime, what you're saying is that somebody would have to throw away something that's perfectly usable, perfectly adequate for purpose, or they will automatically become a felon, which can lead to prison time, right?
Certainly, yeah. And California is, it will lead to that. I mean, I would never advise anybody to tempt their fate in the California courts over something like this. They are serious about being as anti-gun as possible. We talked last week, Mark, about Governor Newsom's attempt to apply the Texas abortion law. The mechanics of that law in California against gun owners and sellers. So to say that they're motivated to strip people of their rights to keep and bear arms and their actual arms is an understatement.
And then, of course, they're stuck with the paradox because, of course, California wants to close down all the prisons. So what do they do with these potentially tens of thousands of automatic overnight felons? Do you think they'll reopen the prisons specifically for Second Amendment offenders?
I know somebody who is moving from California in the next month, and the prices of moving trucks, if you're moving from California to go, for instance, to Florida, which is what this person is doing, is drastically, geometrically less than to go the other way, because the people who have the means and availability and the foresight are getting the hell out of there, and they should, I suppose.
It should perhaps be a reverse gold rush where people hitch up their own wagons, but I'm sure in California you're not allowed to use a horse for public transport. Now,
Mark, it's actually cheaper for this person to fly out of California to pick up the truck, to drive back to California, to then drive it out of there, rather than get it in California. That's how the marketplace is sorting out right now.
And that sounds to me like a wonderful adventure of pure Americana and something I would happily help out with. Now, I have one final question for you, Scott. We can't escape this year without talking about the vaccine mandates. Now, in living memory, this is the first time that people have really been under pressure for this kind of blanket mandate. Now, of course, in certain industries, people are expected to have vaccines for certain things. This is common practice in the military, of course, for serving in theaters overseas. But what's the legal situation here?
Well, Mark, people are realizing that the power of especially state governments to regulate, quote unquote, public health in the form of vaccine mandates has been one way pretty much since the founding. And it is that they are allowed. I think that the big story here is a political story attached to the legal story, which is that if people want their states to be forbidden from or restricted for acting under public health mandates that restrict their liberty, they're going to have to act politically to do so. They're not going to get succor in the courts from liberals, conservatives, or any kind of person along the political spectrum. This is a clear case where that state power has been recognized really throughout our history. And so they're not going to get relief in the courts. That's what we've seen time and time and time again.
Some would suggest that this is probably quite a good thing, though, isn't it? That states have the power to override specifically federal wishes or even federal mandates, as has been the case. We've seen Joe Biden's federal mandates struck down again and again, or just ignored by state governors. So,
let me stop you right. Let me just please stop you right there and say that there's a vast difference between state action and federal action in this area. So there haven't been historically many, if any, federal mandates in this area. They have come from state law. And while the Biden federal mandate has been stricken down by, I lost count of how many different courts have, stricken it down, we don't have the same experience with state level mandates, restrictions, shutdowns, what have you. And that's historically where this public health mandate and recognition of it has come from in the courts. And those same courts that are striking down those federal mandates are not striking down, by and large, state mandates. So I celebrate that any mandate for people to have to put some solution in their arm that a government functionary says is going to be good is a bad idea and should be stricken down. But it's important to realize that that's not happening at the state level, even as it does happen with this federal mandate.
Well, I think that ties us very nicely back into what we talked about earlier, where people can move where they want to deal with state laws as they wish. And that's one of the real wonders of the United States of America, especially for me as a Brit who watches on and just marvels at the prospect of being able to choose which state you want to live in while still being an American. And that's something that I think as this Christmas we can all be thankful for.
The 50 laboratories of democracy within our constitutional republic, Mark.
And may it long reign. Merry Christmas to you, Scott.
Ho, ho, ho.
And that's all we have time for on this Christmas edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our special guests, Editor-in-Chief of LibertyNation.com, Lisa K. Donner, National Columnist Sarah Cowgill, Economist Andrew Moran, and of course, Talking Liberty's uncaped crusader, Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. My thanks and appreciation go out to you, the constant listener, for your continued support and engagement. You're deeply appreciated. A parting thought for you, if I may. In President Calvin Coolidge's Christmas presidential address in 1927, he said, quote, "To the American people, Christmas is not a time or a season, but a state of mind. To cherish peace and goodwill, to be plenteous in mercy, is to have the real spirit of Christmas. If we think on these things, there will be born to us a Savior, and over us will shine a star, sending its gleam of hope to the world." End quote. Now, I feel that this is an important idea to keep hold of over the season. We all enjoyed the feasts, the family, the friends, the beautiful decorations that light up our homes and delight our families and our neighbors, and of course the gifts. Who doesn't appreciate thoughtful gifts? But remember, that feeling of goodwill to all men is not something we can turn on and off like lights on a Christmas tree. It should be something that resonates from deep within to those folks all around us, keeping the spark of humanity, humility, and gratitude for the blessings we have going all year long. The greatest Christmas gift we can each individually give the world is our continued effort at keeping the spiritual essence of the season alive and well, until it comes time to start the whole season once more. Thank you for sharing this Christmas with us here on Liberty Nation Radio. We'll be back together in the coming new year for our special analysis on what 2022 holds for us in the world of politics, law, culture, and the Fourth Estate. See you soon. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.